Welcome back to Out of Possession, and today we're actually going to talk about international football for once. And I think there's only one team you can look at right now, and obviously that is Italy. What has gone wrong over there? We're going to look at the national team, we're going to look at the Serie A. So naturally, I'm joined by the only person I know that watches the Serie A. It's Ryan Talks Ball. And maybe for the people who aren't aware of what you do, Ryan, do you want to just explain to them quickly where they can find you, what kind of content you do, etc., etc., etc.?
Of course. So, hey guys, my name is Ryan. Ryan Waffles About Ball on TikTok. I tend to tell stories within football, and most of my focus is on English and Italian football. So, yeah, perfect for today.
Yeah, I think what you're really good at as well is maybe finding the stories that other people miss. I think there's a real tendency on football TikTok especially, like you just see the same things recycled. Like recently it's been people putting up a picture of the French national team and going, these guys are so good, how are we going to stop them? But I think, yeah, you find the things that maybe other people miss, and that's why I really like your account. And like you said there, you do like Italian football and watch the Serie A. Maybe not to the extent that I've branded you as doing, but definitely more than other people. So we're going to have a conversation about that today. And like I said, naturally, I think we have to start with the national team, and maybe as we delve deeper into that, one of the effects of why they are so poor is the league. But I look at this squad, and I don't know if you'll agree with this, and I don't think they should be performing at the level they are. Like, I think they've got some really good players in here, especially the defence. Like, this back four is really, really good. Calafiori is one of the best left-backs in the world for me. Bastoni, one of the best centre-backs in the world for me. Donnarumma, I don't really like, but as an international goalkeeper, I think he's quite good. Mancini, I watched loads of him, but he's probably decent. And then look at the midfield as well. Like, Tonali and Barella are midfields I rate really highly. And then I think Locatelli, by all accounts, is one of the most underrated players in the world at the moment. So why, when they have this squad, do you think they are doing so badly?
I don't think they have an identity. I think their identity has shifted between essentially what you'd expect of an Italian team, defence first, Catenaccio, relying on that technical midfield. But they've been trying to modernise, albeit a little bit too late, and they're sort of stuck between worlds at the moment.
Do you think maybe in the next few years then we'll see them transition successfully to maybe a more attacking style? Or do you think they'll maybe pivot back to a more defensive thing, which obviously is that traditional Italian identity with the likes of Maldini and Nesta? Do you see them going back on themselves and improving that way? Or do you think they'll push on through no man's land, if you like, and then build a new identity?
I think a lot depends on who they get in as president. I think, I don't know if you saw, but big deal has been made out of that when Italy were knocked out of the group in the World Cup in 2010, Roberto Baggio came up with a 900-page dossier of essentially detailing how he would restructure Italian football, and none of it got listened to. And a lot of the suggestions he made are ones that are still completely pertinent today. It seems like they have taken some of his teachings on board, but just far too late. So I think realistically they have to move with the times, but they're already so far behind.
I don't mean to put you on the spot. Do you know what some of the suggestions were in his script or whatever he submitted?
Yeah, so the first was Italian academies traditionally will set up their players so that they know the ins and outs of the Catenaccio system. They know how to defend properly, and that's kind of it. That's it. So Baggio's first suggestion was looking on, say, Clairefontaine and then, say, Ajax, PSV Final, those kind of academies, where they focus essentially more on individual style and technique rather than just learning how to play in a system. And the secondary part of it was he was insistent that the league essentially finds some sort of incentive to play their youth, which they are trying to implement now. What was it, 16 years on?
Yeah, I think the roots of the issue naturally are going to come with the problems in the league, which we'll get onto later. But just focusing on the national team more, obviously the weird context is in the middle of this terrible run of being knocked out of 3 World Cups in a row, not being knocked out of, not qualifying for 3 World Cups in a row, they won the Euros. So how has that transpired? Because they were one of the best teams in the Euros. How do you go from such low lows either side, in achieving that incredible high, and then back to back lows? It's unseen before, really.
A big part of it is, so the traditional system that Italians play relies on specifically that solid defense, man-to-man press, that kind of thing. But specifically, it was the midfield. It was, to put it bluntly, just having midfield that could produce genius. If you had Baggio or Gattuso or Pirlo, then you could kind of just leave a lot to them, just leave lots of their imaginations. Italians continue to do that, despite not having the same requisite quality available to do that. It's like, how do you imagine Guardiola would take a system, say if he was what's going on there?
So I don't know. So I was just trying to search up the final team so I can see what it was. And then screen started changing.
Right. Nah, so
Sorry, I've knocked your flow there.
it's like it's like if Guardiola were to try and implement the same system he's using at City or Barcelona or Bayern at like West Ham. It just wouldn't have the same effect. So Mancini, I think more than anything, was the first to actually emphasize his wingers. That's why, say, if you think of the key Italian players, you don't just think of the defense. You probably also think of Chiesa. You probably also remember some of Insigne's contributions. He was the one that actually set up the team so that it wasn't reliant on the midfield producing moments of magic. It was, it was functioning with the attackers in mind as well.
Yeah, I think that is the noticeable weakness of this Italian team for me as well. When you look at the squad, like they've got Moise Keane and some bloke called Ragagai over on there. I've probably butchered it, but yeah, that's the one. I assume he plays in Italy. Oh, he doesn't. He plays for Al Qadish.
Oh, yeah.
I've never heard of him before, which maybe shows bad ball knowledge. But either way, that's not a strong attack. Like, it is a fall from grace from Chiesa, Immobile, and Insigne. So would you have that as one of the key reasons for why maybe they're not as successful now as they were in that Euros?
Yeah, hugely. Although one thing to note is that Immobile has actually never really been any good on the national team. If there's one thing that actually has gone well in recent times, it's that in the last 7 games, Moise Kean has scored. So he's playing all right. But as for the quality of the attack, it's been, I'd probably say going back to like maybe Luca Toni, the last time they had a genuinely elite striker that actually performed in the national team.
I think it's a lack of that star power as well, because you can have players like Moise Kean, who, they're going to score relatively consistently. But I think especially in international football, where it's so much more about the individuals than in club football, where I think it's very much about the collective now, having that star power, whether that's your Harry Kane, whether it's an Mbappe, whether it's even like a Yildiz for Turkey, I think that is almost the most important thing now. And in this attack, I don't really see many moments players. Like, I talked about the midfields being really good. They had Tonali, Locatelli, and Barella that played against Bosnia, but I don't really see anyone in there that's a crazy creative player in terms of that star quality. I look at Locatelli, yes, he's a great deep passer, but he's probably not going to play a great pass in the final third that's going to create a chance. Tonali, fantastic out of possession, again, pretty good in deeper areas, but he's not going to be that creative player that's going to find that amazing pass. Barella maybe more so, but I still wouldn't categorize him as a really attacking player. So maybe they are lacking in attack. We talked before as well about Politano playing almost every game. I only remembered him from being an 83 rated born on like FIFA 20. But again, he's not an insane winger. You kind of described him as Inter Milan, who he doesn't play for now. Who does he play for? Napoli's. You described him as being Napoli's Savio, which isn't really someone I think you want starting for the national team. You want someone who's an exciting, explosive winger, and they don't have that on either side. Again, DiMarco is a great wing back, but is he great as a more attacking player? Not to the extent a winger would be for me. Do you think these wide areas are also a problem?
Definitely, 110%. Italy, for the last, I'm not sure for how long, but most of the teams in the league just play 3-5-2. You don't develop wingers like that. Although, I guess the weird thing is, DiMarco's he's barely a defender realistically. He has the most goal contributions in Serie A this season. He has, I think, 7 goals and 13 assists or something. So he is probably the closest thing the Italy national team have to like a lock-picking star, which is sort of insane to say at the moment.
Yeah, and you touched there on maybe it is because of the Serie A. We'll get onto that now, because I think that's where this becomes more interesting than going through the national team and going, they're pretty bad. They're also pretty bad. I think the Serie A is the root cause of this, right? Because for me, I'd say it's the weakest league out of the big 5. I think the French league has probably eclipsed it now, just because of the strength of PSG, and I think that trickles down. I think for me, it's definitely more of an interesting league than the Serie A. And we talked about the Italian national team maybe not having identity, and I think something that's really interesting is how you touched on there. The identity of the Serie A is so different to the rest of Europe. Like, all across Europe right now, we're seeing man-to-man pressing, we're seeing 4-4-2s in defense, and we're seeing in attack maybe like a 3-2-5, right? And I'm not sure that's the case in Italy. Like, it's the only place in the world where you'll necessarily see consistently everyone playing a back 3. You mentioned everyone's playing the 3-2-5, 3-5-2 even, and that not developing good wingers. But equally, there's an issue with teams not really developing youth effectively, right?
Really, I saw a graph that were essentially saying that of the top 5 leagues, Italy gives the least time to under 21s. And I don't know if you've seen the chart, but it's what's gotten Como a lot of stick this season. They've given 1 minute to an Italian player this season. But on the other side of that, the teams in the league that give the most time to Italians are all in the bottom five.
Yeah, I think that's just naturally the case in any league, though. I'd be willing to bet, maybe not to the extent of the Premier League now, because it is so diverse and there's so much money, everyone can have these foreign imports. But I think if you look at the majority of the league, like I'm willing to bet in the Bundesliga, the teams that will play the most Germans will be near the bottom just because it's cheaper to bring through Germans maybe from lower leagues than it is to...
It's more mid-table. Typically, in Germany, the bottom teams, weirdly enough, always seem to use a lot of Austrians.
I think that's kind of mutually exclusive, though. I'd say that, not to disrespect any Germans and Austrians, but it's a bit like saying English teams don't use homegrown players because they're all Welsh, which...
Yeah, fair point.
But you get what I mean, though. In France, I reckon the teams that will have the most French players will be the teams lower down, because as you get higher up the table, you have more money, so can go out and afford better players, which are probably going to be foreign players typically. But I think the point on Como is really interesting, right? Because they're kind of the outlier to the identity of Italian football at the moment. They've got Cesc Fabregas in. He's a very modern coach. They don't play the 3-5-2 like almost everyone else in this league does. And their team looks like something I build on Football Manager, which, again, to your point of maybe youth players not being used in Italy, it goes against that. But the thing is, in the context of the national team, almost none of these players are Italian. They're all foreign imports of young players. So do you think this helps Italy as a whole, as a product, or do you think it's a net negative for them?
I think it's a net negative, and I think a big part of that is that ultimately the really good players aren't going to stay there anymore. Like, without some sort of specific connection, like maybe I can imagine someone like Kenan Yildiz staying at Juve for a while, and maybe he ends up being the person that can take them back to the heights they used to be at. But I don't see anyone coming over at like 23, 24 and pledging their career there. I think the closest you get to that these days is, in terms of, I guess, world-class players, I don't even know if most people class him as one, but Lautaro Martinez. Italy just isn't, it's just not a final destination anymore. And where I think that tracks is that it's a stepping stone. If it was like a final destination, I think that would trickle down to Italians, but now, because it's just such a rotating door.
Yeah, and we see that in the context of Como again. Nico Paz is probably their star player this season, and he's barely been there like, 1-2 seasons now, and there's already talks of him leaving to Real Madrid as soon as he's shown that he is a good footballer. So, like you say, the whole league is almost seen as this stepping stone. To Gianni Reinders, as soon as he started to break out at AC Milan, he's gone for what was a really cheap fee as well, in my opinion. I don't really feel like the league is selling it's not selling at good prices where that money is reinvestable, but also we don't really see the chain of command almost. There's not a team in Italy that kind of has a monopoly of the league. You know, if a player breaks out in Germany, there is a really good chance they will go to Bayern Munich or they'll go to Borussia Dortmund. They'll move up the league, but they'll stay in the Bundesliga. Same thing in France, right? If someone breaks out in France for Rennes, for example, there's quite a good chance they'll go and sign for PSG. And I don't think we really see that in Italy. Like, if someone breaks out in the mid-table, I think it's just as likely that they're going to go to a foreign club than get a move to Inter or AC Milan, because they're just not attractive clubs at the moment.
Really, yeah, 100%. It's just a lot of the time you think like, I can get offered more money, say even among the Premier League mid-table, or even say one of the teams fighting for Champions League even in Germany, for instance. Like, there's not a lot of money, there's not seemingly a lot of progression.
And I saw a graph the other day of all of the TV revenues from the retrospective leagues. And obviously, the Premier League is more than every other league put together, which is insane. But then you have your La Liga, the Bundesliga, kind of the next two steps down, relatively similar. And then the Serie A and the French Ligue 1 are absolutely minuscule. And I just don't see a way these leagues can survive, apart from your giants like PSG, because they get Champions League money, because there just isn't the money there, right, to reinvest. Like, even if you sell your best players, you can't go and then buy superstars because there isn't the money to buy superstars. So this Brighton model almost, I don't think really works in somewhere like the Italian league, because our Como, let's say they sell Nico Paz, are they really going to be able to attract the next Nico Paz? Because I don't think it's necessarily an attractive environment to play in, because the league doesn't translate in terms of a tactical landscape to the Premier League, for example. And therefore, I think Premier League teams, which, if that's ultimately your end destination, which I think it is for most footballers, do they want to go to Italy if Premier League teams don't really want to buy there? If I was a footballer and I had a choice between playing for Reims, for example, in France, or I had a choice between playing for Como, I think I'd go to Reims every day of the week, just because the tactical landscape of the French league is very, very similar to the Premier League. And therefore, teams are far more likely to look there than they are are in Italy. Again, the translatability of it is really good, whereas I'm not sure it is in the Italian league, which is another negative for them ultimately.
Easily, yeah. I mean, Nico Paz, how he ended up going to Como is he essentially was signed on the same kind of deal that, say, Danny Carvajal had when he went to Leverkusen. What was it, like 10, 15 years ago? It's essentially that if he ends up being good, Real Madrid have like a really, really minuscule buyback clause, like 8 or 10 million. So it is essentially like it's more or less a loan than an actual permanent player.
What really is the benefit of Como doing that then? So obviously you get 2 good seasons out of him, but in terms of thinking in the long term, there's not really a benefit for them taking him for me, because the only way they keep him is if he's crap, and then you don't really want to keep him, right?
I guess it's because when they signed Nico Paz, they had just gotten promoted from Serie B. So I don't know if they expected what has happened to them to happen so quickly. You know, they're likely going to be playing at least Europa League next year. I actually think they're going to get Champions League. But they came up, they finished, I think, 10th or 11th, and now they're in Champions League contention. So I guess maybe they've essentially just they've subverted their own expectations. And I guess maybe I guess the best scenario would be that Nico Paz was a little bit worse, so that he was still useful to them, but just maybe not good enough to be useful to Real Madrid at some point. Even then, I think they probably buy him and sell him on.
I think he suffers from something completely different again, but it's the same thing where I think Lamine Yamal's too good for his own good. And we'll go off on a bit of a tangent here, because I think he plays far too many minutes for someone as young as he is. So I wouldn't be surprised with Lamine Yamal if we see him get to like 26, 27, where you'd expect these players to go into their prime, and we just see him really fall off at that point, kind of like a Rooney type player, if you want, to a bigger extent. Same thing with Pedri as well. Like, I think these players are too good for their own good at this young age, that we're going to see them struggle to have the longevity that a Messi did, that a Ronaldo did. And Yamal dwarfs every other player's numbers in terms of minutes, obviously, below 18 for the last however many years. But when you look at the list of players that have played significant minutes at a young age, almost all of them do struggle to have that longevity. You know, it's guys like Neymar, guys like Rooney we touched on there. And I think that could be an issue for Yamal. And this isn't related to Italian football at all, so we'll move back swiftly. But I think that's an interesting narrative. But we were talking about maybe the league not being attractive just due to the lack of quality. And you mentioned Como being surprised that they'll get European football. I don't think that is surprising. When you look at the investment they have and the players they brought in, I look at Como's squad and think, yeah, that's one of the better squads in the league. Because if we just look at the performance of Italian teams in the Champions League this season, the best ranking team was Inter Milan, who finished 10th in the table and then got knocked out by Bodo Glimt, which isn't great. The second best performing team was Juventus, who lost to Galatasaray in the playoff round. Then we have Atalanta, who did get through the playoff round. They were the best performing team, but then they got dogged, 10-2 by Munich. I think that shows us the quality of the league just isn't there. For me, Napoli finishing 30th after winning the Scudetto the season prior. I think that this tells us how weak the league is. And I think a lot of people like to paint the picture that the Serie A is a really good league. And I think maybe it's a good league for the viewer because everyone's so bad, it's quite close. Like at the moment, there isn't this big monopoly team like I think every other league has, whether that's PSG in France, whether it's Bayern Munich in Germany, who are going to be really, really good and win it. I think the Italian league, in terms of quality, is very, very similar to those divisions. For me, it just doesn't have that giant team at the top, which makes it competitive. But I don't think that means the quality is higher, like some people like to paint.
I think, see, the thing is, you say about not having like a monopoly, Inter actually were really, like, if you were to change 4 results in the last 4 seasons, Inter would have won 4 of the last 5 Scudetti and 2 of the last 3 Champions Leagues. That's very like whataboutery, but Inter have gotten close, and I think there definitely have been seasons where it's because they have been fantastic. It's because they have been brilliant, but a lot of the time it does feel like essentially they just happen to be the best of the middling pack, you know.
And I think if we look at the division this year, for example, I think Inter will probably win it. They're on 69 points, but then you've got Milan on 63, Napoli 62, Como 57, Juventus 54. Like, it's quite close. And I don't think any of those teams are necessarily good like you have in the Premier League, for example, in that top half race. I think they're all equally bad, and maybe that's harsh, but as someone who actually watches the division, you'll know better than me. Would you agree with that or not?
See, the weird thing is, I would tell you that from my perspective, the most impressive team this year have been Napoli, because they've had the weakest squad because of they've had an injury crisis not too dissimilar to Tottenham last year, and yet they've been able to remain competitive. I think Napoli at full strength should would probably be the best team in the league, but we've seen that so infrequently. And I think they've done a really good job to stay where they are. Champions League, I think, was a step too far with the amount of players they had. But I do think there's definitely weight in that. This year, I think more than any, I think has been the weakest Serie A I've seen. I think this year specifically, Inter are on top because of the lack of competition. Inter have gotten to the top by beating the teams they're supposed to beat routinely. Essentially, they've been as you'd expect against teams outside of the top six, but they've been horrendous against teams they're supposed to be meant to be competing against. Really got 1 point out of 4 games against Milan, and then obviously this broken down Napoli. They lost once against Juventus and beat them because of a really awful red card call. And they've not won any of their last. They've not won any of their last 4. Yeah, they're still 6 points. They're still 6 points ahead.
I think that's what a league format is, though. It's about beating the crap teams. And this is why I think Arsenal are a good team in the Premier League for league football. Like, people will say they're not deserving winners, maybe because they haven't been as dominant against the top teams this season. For example, in the Liverpool games, you'll know as a Liverpool fan, they haven't been very good. Same thing against Man United. But I don't think that's fair at all, because I think a league is about beating the mid-table and lower table teams really consistently. And if you're really good at that, you're a very, very good league football team. And therefore, you're a good football team, because the league's a massive part of any club's calendar. So I don't think that's necessarily fair on Inter, maybe, in my perspective.
The thing is, I would say, by the same token, right, Arsenal aren't dominant against the big teams, but they're not crap by any means.
That is true.
Inter have been crap against the top teams. Like, not mediocre, very poor.
Maybe it is slightly different then. I want to talk about one of the other top teams, and the other team in Milan, which is AC Milan, because I think they're really interesting at the moment in the context of the Serie A being really bad, because I think their squad is really bad, and yet they still sit second on 63 points. And again, I think it reflects the lack of competitiveness in this league. And I don't think there's anyone that shows that better than Luka Modric. This is a guy who, yes, when he left Madrid, he was still playing at quite a good level. But at the age of 40, he shouldn't be allowed to run the division like he does. And this is something we've seen a lot of players. I don't know how good Kevin De Bruyne has been, but I just see the little highlights he gets every few weeks. So maybe he's been terrible and I'm wrong. But the fact that these players come to Italy almost as a retirement home, to me, suggests an intensity issue with the league.
To an extent, maybe. I just think even at its peak, I think Italian football has always been structured so that players get more time. It's not typically been as physical. It's something that, even 10, 15 years ago, this was happening. Like, what was it? I think 2019, Fabio Quagliarella at 37 was the league's top scorer. It's a league where veterans have always shined in because of, I think, more cerebral nature of it rather than physical.
But again, I think this shows how Italy maybe isn't moving with the times, because the narrative around football right now is, it's becoming really physical. It's not football anymore. And you look at Italy and it's almost the complete opposite. It's not physical at all. And this has led to teams being dunked out of Europe quite comfortably. I think, especially Inter against Bodo Glimt, like, Inter Milan are the better footballing side. No one disputes that, but they were just ran off the pitch, really. And that's a problem. And it makes it boring to watch. People say they want to watch footballers, but I just find the intensity so low. And ultimately, everything comes back to money, right? Because you need money to be a good football team. And the way you get money, firstly, is through TV rights. And if the league is at this really low intensity, it is boring to watch. I think that's just the reality of it. And I can't see a world where the Serie A can make a comeback unless the intensity increases, because at the moment it's just a retirement home, right? No one wants to watch Luka Modric past his peak when you've watched him at his peak for ages and you can watch other players at their peak. No one wants to watch a washed-up Kevin De Bruyne with a hamstring injury when you've watched him tear up the Premier League for the last 5 years, and now you can watch Ryan Cherki in the Premier League. I think you kind of need stars now, and I think Napoli are a really good example of this, because they obviously had Osimhen and they had Kvaratskhelia, and both of them now play elsewhere. Osimhen would rather play in Turkey than in Italy, and I think that's really damning. Obviously, that's because of the wage bill, but again, it comes back to money, and I think Napoli should be capable of paying those wages.
The case with Osimhen, he's in Turkey essentially because he just, the relationship with Napoli has just been completely ruined. It was a case of, I'll play anywhere on the globe that isn't Napoli. I do understand. I do definitely agree with you. It's not just that the wages are lower; it's that the wage ceilings typically have been used pretty poorly in recent memory. Vlahovic, for instance, has been okay this season and been all right generally in his spell, but he was the league's top earner since 2022 onwards, and I would say for at least a third of that time, Juve have been actively trying to get rid of him. The money spent has been spent poorly. I think the money being spent poorly is essentially what led to the collapse of, presumably as someone who doesn't watch the Serie A a lot, the perception is that Juve were the last actual good team to come out of it, and then they just sort of faded away. Where in reality, they spent their money really poorly, and it set them back. It set them back so far, and now they're lagging behind as a result of it.
Yeah, I think I'd agree with that. I don't know if that's true or not, but definitely from my perspective, I see Juventus as the last really good Italian team, which maybe isn't fair given how successful Inter Milan have been in Europe recently. But I don't see that success as being dominating. I see them as getting maybe slightly nice routes and slight luck in certain games. For example, against Barcelona last season, I think they got hammered really and just took their moments really well. And I don't see that as a sign of a really good footballing team. It's maybe one that's got lucky on the day, but definitely, yeah, from my perspective, Juventus are the last giants. And you look at them now and think, yeah, what's happened really? Because obviously they've got quality players still like Yildiz, but they're definitely in shorter supply than they were before.
100%, yeah. Ultimately, with Juventus, I think the key turning point was essentially Cristiano Ronaldo, because he was brought in for no other purpose than to win the Champions League. That was the last thing that Juve had to conquer, and that didn't happen because one player could not win the Champions League on his own. Regardless of him scoring 30 goals in the league every year, the goal was the Champions League. That was the ace that could bring Juventus the money they needed to circumvent signing Ronaldo, and that didn't happen. So when that project failed, the residual wasn't anywhere near enough to compensate, which is how Juventus essentially came from 9 years on the bounce, winning the league, and in the mid-2010s, I would say PSG, Bayern, City, Chelsea, and the two Spanish giants were the 6 teams where you knew that every year, without failure, they would get into at least the knockouts of the Champions League. It was a given. It was non-negotiable. So they went from that. They went from one of, I would say, the top 5 teams in the world to now essentially struggling to get into the top 5 of their own country, which has been the case for most of the last, say, 5 or 6 years.
As boring as it is, I think it always comes back to finances, because you alluded there that the reason they have declined is because they took a risk and it didn't pay off. But for example, if we look at the Premier League, these teams can take those risks all the time and then be fine after. Like Manchester City, for example, we spend a lot of money and I think a lot of it is spent really, really well. But we've been trying to find that midfield partner for Rodri for ages and ages now. We went through Calvin Phillips, 50 million, failed. That's okay. If we did that in the Serie A, you don't get to roll the dice again because you can't afford to. We rolled the dice with Nico Gonzalez. I think he's been quite good. He hasn't been what we wanted, though. Again, you'd probably say so far that's a failure. To Johnny Reinders, I think he will have another role in the squad that will be useful, but not the role we wanted him to play. Again, a fail. But we can continue to roll the dice because we're fucking rich. And Juventus can't do that necessarily. And that's damning because buying players is really difficult. You're always going to fail at some point. And I think if the reality is the first time that you fail, you're done, it's inevitable that the club's going to fall off because it's impossible to have an 100% success rate. Like we said, I mentioned there, even Manchester City, in my opinion, probably one of the best buying clubs in the world, fail quite frequently.
That's a big thing you just said, actually, because I reckon what you and most other City fans know about Nico Gonzalez is that he probably hasn't been worth the money, but you're still probably happy you bought him. Is that like a good 100%. Assessment? Like you wouldn't. I feel the same way about Florian Wirtz, weirdly enough, in that he's probably flopped for the money we bought him for, but I'm so happy we bought him. That is not the case in Italy. If you buy someone for not even 60, even for 30 million, and he's not, ripping up, that's a failure because of how much that amount of money goes in that league relative to elsewhere.
It's about the opportunity cost, right? We know with money in the Premier League, it's like we've bought this player, he hasn't worked out. Oh no, maybe an opportunity cost is the wrong word, I think. Or maybe it is, because in Italy, for example, the opportunity cost of, say you want to buy a player for 40 million is you won't be able to buy another player for 40 million. Whereas in the Premier League, you can buy that player and then you've got so much money, you can still buy the other player. Like there isn't really that opportunity cost. Like the spending limits are almost infinite. Like there's not really a huge ceiling there. And therefore the risk is far lower on every transfer. And like you said there, in the Serie A, if you can't afford to fail, you're going to fail still. And it all comes back to money, unfortunately. And it's a vicious cycle as well, isn't it? Because it's almost impossible to get out of. If, our TV money's low, we can't buy quality, so people don't want to watch the league. It just going to keeps decline. I think it's really hard to get out of that pit without serious luck.
Completely. Like, as you say, a Premier League team, even mid-table team, realistically can take like a 30-40 million loss like it's nothing. I would kind of aggregate most Serie A teams now to teams in the Championship who, say like Derby or Sheffield Wednesday, overspent trying to get promotion, and that has completely screwed them over because they didn't achieve that. That's kind of the risk involved in Serie A now, where a couple of huge losses and failure to return in the league or the cups, for instance, can be catastrophic. That's why, for instance, you see teams bankrupting quite frequently in Italy. Like, I think within my lifetime, Parma have gone into administration, been sent to the fourth tier twice, and come back up again. It's not uncommon. You probably remember seeing teams on kickoff in FIFA that just don't exist anymore.
I think the interesting thing as well, I think Man United are a really good example of what we're talking about here, because they have just failed with almost every transfer they've made over the past 100 years, bloody hell, 10 years, for example, since Ferguson left. And they're still fine. They're still fine because Premier League money is so dominant. And compare that to Juventus, for example, where if we're saying the catalyst for this decline is Cristiano Ronaldo, they failed once, and this has caused that. And I think that shows the difference between the leagues so vividly. I think something else that is interesting is just how much selling power do you have? Because the way you probably get out of this hole, right, is by maybe selling some players for big money and then reinvesting it really smartly. And maybe once you do that 5 times, you'll have enough money to make a push for the Champions League. That's the only way to battle really low TV money. But I think, again, that's way harder to do in Italy than it is in the Premier League. And that's because, like we talked about previously, the tactical landscapes are so different. And therefore, Italian players and players who have been successful in Italy don't command the same fees as, for example, a player who's been successful in the Premier League. Look at Elliot Anderson. I think he's amazing. But Nottingham Forest have a good player there. They will sell him for 90 to 100 million, something ridiculous. Yeah. Tijani Reinders, for example, for AC Milan, who maybe not to the same extent of Elliot Anderson, but he was one of the best players in the Serie A. He was fantastic. What did he go for? 50 million? That money is just not the same. And therefore, again, it becomes so much harder to get out of this, because whereas a Premier League team to accumulate funds to go and reinvest in a squad effectively maybe need to sell 2 really good players because they'll get 90 mil each. For an Italian team to do the same, they need to sell 5 players. And that's almost impossible. And it is a dark picture, right? But let's be positive for a moment just to finish on Italy. How do you think they can get out of this awful situation that the Serie A is in right now? How can it turn things around and get back to its previous glory days?
I feel like the previous glory days, the glory days of them, being the peak of football, I don't see how that's ever going to come back. I think we're past the point of that. We're past the point of, we're past the point of Milan having won 7 Champions Leagues and it being a regular thing. I don't think that happens anymore. But I think, in essence, they are somewhere between stuck in their rigid mindset and also trying to progress. I think they just need to go full throttle into trying to move along with the times rather than try and hold back. Follow Baggio's advice, revamp the academies. It's got to be structural, and essentially just create players and create systems for which they're not useless if they're not played in a specific way. I think ultimately the only thing they can do now is, like you say, is hugely financial based, and without very good reason, they're not going to get the TV revenue coming back in. So I think it's got to come from within. It's got to come from the things that they are in control of. I do think they can get back to a level of respectability, and I think in time they will definitely have teams that are amongst the elite, but it just will take time. And it's not going to be an easy process. I think with regards to the league, they got to move along. I think a big part of the stubbornness you see is the perfect microcosm is Cesc Fabregas. He's changed things up, and the old dogs, the Allegris, the Gasperinis, they hate him. They can't stand him. Whereas they just need to be more accepting that that's the way of the future. That's the way they've got to go. That's the way they've got to adapt.
Yeah, I think Gasperini is really interesting, and just managers in Serie A in general, because it just highlights again how different this league is from the rest of the world. And this is something that holds Italy back majorly, in my opinion, because you'll never see an Italian manager really go and be successful out of Italy. I don't think. You're either if you're a good Serie A manager, that doesn't translate over to other leagues because the Serie A is so different tactically. And similarly, you'll never see a great manager outside of Italy maybe move into the Serie A and hit the ground running straight away. And it almost creates this, I don't want to say monopoly, but it's like an exclusive group, right, of managers who are Italian, where you haven't got that variety, and that means you can't bring these names across to have this boom. And I think it hurts them again. Like you've got your Gasperinis, your Inzaghi's, all these guys are very, we are Italian, we play in our way. And I think Cesc Fabregas being a breath of fresh air, like you said, and being criticised for it, again, it's only negative.
Yeah, and Italians, more than anyone else, use the same kind of rotating wheel of costs. Like Allegri's jumped from Milan to Juve to Milan again. And that's just something you wouldn't see happen anywhere else, especially because towards the end of all of those reigns of his, he's been pretty wildly despised by most of the fans of his own team because of the way he plays, and yet he'll continue to go and get jobs for their competitors, for their rivals.